Hello, hello, everybody. I am so thrilled to welcome my beautiful friend, Olivia. Welcome to the podcast. I am so happy to have you here and have this conversation that we're having today. Tell us about you and how you got to doing what you're doing.
Yeah, so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Olivia Vizachero, and I am a life coach for lawyers. I help attorneys who are over the overwhelm live lives with less stress and far more fulfillment. I am a former attorney myself and found coaching when I was practicing in big law and was struggling with so many things that my clients struggle with: people pleasing, perfectionism, procrastination. I call them the three P's. And I really didn't have the tools or the skill set to navigate those struggles. And I found coaching, was able to resolve that stuff myself. And then I felt like I had the secret to the universe. So I decided to leave the practice of law, become a coach. And now I help people just like the old version of me overcome the same struggles. And I'm having the time of my life.
That's so good. And I love that you called it the secret of the universe because it really does sometimes feel, right? Like coaching is it kind of unlocks that secret that I kind of feel like so many times I think especially for high achieving women, it's like we know better. We know that there is something better and yet we're kind of not able to implement it. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious when you think about like that moment where you discovered that secret to the universe, what was it for you in that moment that helped you be like, okay, this is going to be changing my life specifically enough to leave being in the law and pursuing coaching full time?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me was it's this two-step process. And I can so clearly see when I learned the model that thoughts cause your feelings, and that's like your brain breaks immediately because you're like, wait,
Right.
what? Other people don't cause how I feel, the world doesn't cause how I feel, other people's actions, what they say or what they do or what they don't say and what they don't do, none of that's actually causing my feelings. My mind was blown. And
Yeah.
to really understand that you can control how you feel by controlling what you think, and that our thoughts aren't true, that was the first step. And everything started to shift from there. And then it wasn't instantaneous, but a little while after, it clicked for me that if that was true for me, I'm not a unicorn. So that's also true for other people, that their thoughts cause their feelings. I don't cause their feelings. And I was a horrific people pleaser at the time. I mean,
Yeah.
next level, turned myself backwards, into a pretzel to
Mhm.
accommodate everyone else and make sure that like they didn't experience a negative emotion. And it was ruining my life being a people pleaser. Like I picked jobs for the wrong reasons based on what other people thought of my decisions. I was an extreme workaholic because I wanted to be like the superhero and I didn't want anyone to be upset with me. And I just wanted to constantly go above and beyond. So when I learned that I wasn't responsible for how other people feel, that is the moment for me where it's like someone wrote me a permission slip to be like, you get to go live your life exactly how you want to live it now. And like other
Yes.
people might have opinions about it and like they might not love
Right.
it. They might feel negative emotions, and that's
Yeah.
not your business.
I think that I mean there's so much there and I think this kind of is a great segue into the conversation that I wanted to have with you. And so for those of you that are listening, I met Olivia. It's been now a couple of years and
Yeah.
I think just in the time that we have gotten to know each other as peers, as coaches and of course as friends, I there's some thing about I think the energy that you put out into your content and into every room you're in, including, any coaching with me, and that's why I wanted to kind of have this conversation with you because I think that people pleasing and really creating boundaries and having expectations of ourselves and others can be such a huge, huge barrier for high achieving women. And I think
Absolutely.
that, the women that are listening to this podcast are predominantly high achieving working moms. But I think that for women specifically, there is some thread around, of course, being a people pleaser, which we've talked about a little bit, but then like learning that we can actually set boundaries and start to solve some of the wreaking of the havoc, right? Because you were saying being a people pleaser, probably not having any boundaries,
None.
was wreaking havoc. So, like, if we just take a minute before coaching, how were you with boundaries? Like, why did it wreak havoc in your life to be the people pleaser that you were?
Yeah, I had no boundaries. and was completely incapable of saying no. And it's really what I learned growing up, right? I
Yeah.
think behavior, especially when it comes to boundaries, it's modeled for us.
Hmm.
And it was modeled for me by a lot of different people. I would definitely say my mom, who did everything to accommodate other people. So I think a lot of women, especially, learn it from the women
Hmm.
that they look up to. So I saw my mom do that, constantly accommodate other people or put herself last and not speak up and just do things to make other people's lives easier. And that's really like our currency as women. We're kind of taught that's your value in the world, is like being that caretaker and accommodating and taking care of other people and making sure everyone else is okay. But then you also get a lot of that rhetoric in the legal industry,
Mm.
that you have to be all things to all people and that you always have to meet your clients' needs. And I was actually in the service industry before I went to law school. So I waitressed and bartended for a really long time. And like the same thing's true there. It's like the customer's always right. So it's just you are always doing things for other people. I think we get that messaging over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And there's a flip side to this that I think is really important to highlight. Being a people pleaser momentarily feels amazing. And if anyone has listened to this, they'll understand what I'm talking about. If they haven't, it's a great TED talk. But Tony Robbins has a TED talk on the 6 basic human needs.
Mm.
And we all have all 6. And we all prefer 2 of the 6. And it's how we make all of the decisions in our lives. And the 6 needs are the need for certainty, the need for variety, the need for significance or to feel needed, the
Mm.
need for love, the need for growth, and the need for contribution. And one of my top 2 choices was the need to feel needed or the need to feel significant. So when you're
Mm.
saying yes to people and you're putting yourself last, like there's for sure a detriment that comes from it, but it also feels really good in the moment. And you have to learn how to like take that badge of honor off and to be okay not getting that significance and not feeling needed in that way when you're setting boundaries and saying no. And that was hard for me to let go of and release.
Yeah, that's so good. And so, like on the podcast, I've shared before, whenever we think about any habit we have, whether it's people pleasing or overeating or over drinking or overworking or over worrying and overthinking, any habit was always born out of some reason because our brain perceived that this is working well, right? Some need is being met. I'm feeling really good in the moment and something is working. And so we turned things into habits. And I think what you and I have probably done because of coaching and in our work for the last few years is we've been challenging certain habits. I'm like looking at this habit of people pleasing, I'm like, this is not really serving me anymore. I wonder how I might want to change that. And I think that that's where it gets hard because as women, we know, especially the brilliant women that are listening to this, I know this is not serving me anymore, but they feel too uncomfortable to make a change. Like what you're talking of, setting a boundary feels uncomfortable. So before we even get into the discomfort, how do you define boundaries? Like you're a people pleaser, you know that this is like creating havoc. How are you defining a boundary at that moment?
The way I think of boundaries, it's always about what I'm doing. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the secrets to the universe, to use that term again, is to like your happiness ratio is directly related to your ability to discern between what you can control and what you can't, and to only focus on what you can control, right? So
Right.
when it
Yeah.
comes to people pleasing and it comes to boundaries, people are normally people pleasing to avoid guilt or worry or fear.
Right.
And that's the same reason that they don't set boundaries, to avoid guilt or worry or fear. But on the flip side of that, when you're not setting boundaries and you're people pleasing, you're normally full of resentment.
Mhm.
And the resentment comes from thinking or expecting other people to be very different than they are. So
Yeah.
the way you can catch this is all that should thinking, right? Like they shouldn't do this. They should do this. They need to be this way. They can't say this. They can't do that. They must. All of that verbiage and rhetoric that goes through our heads, it dials up that resentment. And I think it creates an obstacle to actually setting a boundary, because you never
Mhm.
get to the boundary part because you're so busy arguing with what everyone else is doing and how they're behaving. And you're trying to
Right.
change them and control
Yeah.
that, right?
And almost thinking that your sense of satisfaction, happiness, joy, and delight is riding on that. It's like
1000%.
it really ups the ante, right? Like not only should they be different than they are, or not only should they say something different, my feelings of happiness, satisfaction, joy, and delight are riding on that. And so
Yeah, it
that's,
depends
I
on it.
think, really, really creates so much angst and frustration because we don't get to control the other people. Okay, yeah. So keep going with what you were saying.
So the first step is really understanding that like a boundary is never about what someone else is going to do.
Right.
And it's a really simple question, right? Like you
Mhm.
just have to make sure if you're setting a boundary, does it take into account the reality? And we can put unfortunately in parentheses. I always tell my
Yeah.
clients that. I'm like,
The unfortunate parenthesis.
yeah, the unfortunate reality that other people have free will.
Yeah.
And if it's arguing with the unfortunate reality that other people have free will, it's not a proper boundary. So you have to accept that people literally, and I know people hate the overuse of that word, but people literally get to do whatever they want to do.
Yep.
And then you get to set boundaries in response to it. So a proper boundary is always, I like to just use this simple, if they do blank, I will do blank. And it's always about the action that you'll take when a
Mm.
particular set of circumstances arises. So it's uncomfortable to follow through. And I think that's the other really important thing to talk about here. If you're not willing to do the second clause of the sentence,
Mhm.
then you don't care enough about the offensive behavior.
Right.
Let it go.
Right. I think, and tell me whether this feels true for you, because I wonder, and I know this is because I feel like I'm raising my own hand in me being kind of guilty of this, but sometimes I find that I won't do that. Like I won't want to set the boundary because I'm in righteousness.
Yes.
I'm like unwilling to believe that they shouldn't be changing. It's almost like the should thoughts, like they should be different. I'm like so like I'm holding on to that thought with so much grip. And the way that I feel usually is before resentment is entitled. It's like this entitled, righteous, I'm
Yes.
right, they're wrong. And I think that I'm curious what you think about the ability to let that thought go. Because there's something very powerful in feeling righteous. It means like I know I'm right and like they're just being the jerk, or the boss is, laying down too many rules, or my partner's being annoying. Like all of those things, I feel like how does somebody let go of the should thoughts before they can implement the boundary? Because that's where I think so many women feel like their power is holding
Yeah.
on to the thought.
Correct. So the righteousness ties in with that need to feel significant because you feel
Mm.
important, like you said, when you feel righteous.
Oh
That
yeah.
is a powerful, I think it's like dark chocolate covered caramel, is how I describe it to people. Like it's
Mhm.
so delicious to feel righteous.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
leads to nothing good if you look at the
Yeah.
action that you take from righteous, but it
Right.
does feel very powerful. When that happens, I think two things are really important. One, you want to find the thought.
Yeah.
So if you catch yourself feeling righteous, feeling entitled, feeling justified or outraged is
Yeah.
like a big red
Yeah.
flag for me in my own life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to find the thought, and they don't always present as should thoughts. It's a variant
Yeah.
of a should thought, of course, but what it presents as is like, they can't do it this way. That is always my phrase that like, I know I worked for a man who love him to death. He was a great trial attorney, terrible business owner, and didn't pay us on time.
Right.
And I remember being in this state of outrage. And my
Mhm.
thought was, you can't run a business like this. And when I
Right.
finally saw it, I don't know if I wrote it down or I just got really clear that that was my main thought driving me.
Yeah.
I, I just asked, is that true?
Mm.
And it wasn't true. You literally can run a business like that because he was.
He was, exactly. Like, they can't do it, but no, but they just did. So, they
Exactly.
clearly can, right.
They clearly can. So
Yeah.
finding the the false part of the thought really helps me start to release it. Now, when it's a should, I think it's a little bit harder than like a can't, because a can't is more absolute, right?
Mhm.
Where a should is just really your opinion. And when that happens, I always like to go to, well, what do you want them to do?
Mhm.
Because you've got a manual for them that you want them to
Right.
follow. You have like specific policies and procedures that you want them to implement. And
Yeah.
I always just like to ask myself, do they want to do that?
Right.
Because what's so fascinating to me, like I really am a huge practicer of like being in integrity in my own life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And typically when we find ourselves in these righteous moments, thinking someone should be doing it differently or be different than they are, we want them to be different. We want them to be different in a way that they don't want to be different. So we can feel better. So we're asking them to feel worse
Right.
so we can feel better. And I'm like, every time I realize that, it
Yeah.
grosses me out. I'm like,
Right.
ew, can you just manage
Yeah.
your own mind, Olivia, on like their
Yeah.
behavior instead of needing
Yeah.
them? I'll use this example. It's a food example.
Yeah.
Um, I was on a diet at the time and I was also abstaining from alcohol. So I was just like laden with deprivation, so much deprivation. And it was
Yeah.
during
Yeah.
the pandemic. So the only people I was really seeing were my parents, and I would go out to their house on the weekend. And my parents' house is carb central.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like in excess, it's kind of unbelievable to me. It's like scones in the morning and then like sandwiches for lunch and then like pasta for dinner. I'm like,
Yeah.
how is
Yeah.
everyone not a million pounds, right?
Yeah.
So I was working on losing weight. So I was not eating stuff like that. And I was also working on my over drinking. So I was
Mhm.
abstaining from alcohol and just white knuckling my way through this experience.
Okay.
Every weekend, my mom and I would have conflict about
Mhm.
the menu. And I recognize that it's her house. I can't control what she cooks, but I could cook for myself or I could cook for everyone and just bring the food that I wanted to prepare. So I was doing that for a
Right.
while.
Okay.
But then one night she insisted, she's like, I want pasta. We're eating pasta. You're not cooking. I'm cooking. And it was like pasta with a cream sauce. It was just over the top.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to eat it because it didn't align with my goals.
Okay.
And she had gone to the store to go buy bread for the pasta. And I was like, Maron, like more carbs that I
Yeah.
have to say no to. And then I went to
Yeah.
take a Zoom call after dinner in the basement and I came up right before my call started to grab a water. And unbeknownst to me, she had also bought a cherry pie,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
is my favorite type of pie.
Of course it
And
is. Yeah.
of course,
Of course that's what's sitting there for you to look
yes.
at.
And
Oh,
her and my uncle are just reveling in the joy of eating slices of this cherry
yeah.
pie. And I
Yeah.
create this narrative in my head that like she did it knowing I would be upset and that she was hiding it from me. That's why they waited till I went downstairs. It was a very dramatic story.
Right.
But my first thought was, I can't believe she did that. Like she doesn't care about my weight loss goals. She's not being
Right.
supportive, all this negativity. And I stayed pissed for a week. Like I just
Mm.
sat in my righteousness and
So
outrage.
did you not eat it at all? Like, how did you
No.
get through? So you didn't
Oh,
eat
I
it.
left. I
Oh, you left. Oh,
oh, I like stormed out.
this is the boundary. If they buy the cherry pie, I am leaving the party. So you left the
Yes,
party and then you stayed pissed for a week.
for a week. And
Yes.
then I was driving home and I was like, I know I'm causing this. It's not the cherry pie causing this or the fact that my mom bought the cherry pie. It is my thoughts about the cherry
Yeah.
pie that's making me feel outraged, but I didn't want to change any of them at the moment. And then I'm an only child and I'm really close with my parents. So like a week later, I'm like, enough already. Like I don't want to
Mhm.
be mad anymore. I love my mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had to coach myself on like, you have to get to a different thought. What else could you get to? Because I wasn't going to get to, I think it's amazing that she bought the pie.
Mhm. Mhm.
But what I could get myself to was, I used to be a smoker. So did my mom. We both have
Mhm.
quit.
Yeah.
And my mom replaced her smoking habit with sugar.
Yeah.
And she craves sugar the way I crave a cocktail.
Yeah.
And I'm very familiar with feeling deprived and having to work through that and not wanting to feel deprived and struggling with it and thinking about it. Like, I think my mom thinks about food the way that I would think about
Right.
wine.
Right.
And what I was asking her to do, I wanted
Mm.
her to feel deprived so I didn't have to.
Right. Oh, this is
And
such a good example.
it
Yeah.
just grossed me out. Like, for
Right.
myself, I was like,
Right.
ew, like your poor
Yeah.
mom. Don't make her feel
Yeah.
deprived. If she wants to eat the damn cherry pie, like let her eat
Yeah.
the damn cherry pie. And
Does
you
she also love
created,
cherry pie the way you do? I'm just curious. It's like a separate
yeah,
side question.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I think, and tell me whether this feels true, and even in this example, but like in any example that's similar to this, I feel like we have these thoughts. Like she bought the cherry pie, she wants the pasta, she's buying the bread. There's like a how dare she? Like how
That's how I
dare
felt.
that person, right? Like how dare they? And it's coming from the lens of like they must not care about what matters to me. And if they cared about me, then they would care about like doing what I want them to do.
Yeah.
And I think that this is true of like, parent child relationships, but like partnerships and spouses and even with your
Yes.
bosses and colleagues. Like
Mhm.
if they really cared about the team, they wouldn't like overwork us. Or if they really cared about the business, then they would pay us on time. Like things like we have a lot of thoughts like that. And I think that the trouble with that is that it's and I think we all humans do this because we have a negative bias. We start with the like worst case scenario and then we start making decisions from the worst case scenario, which my
Yes.
friends, if you're doing this, like let's pause doing that because the worst case scenario, having the lens of the worst case scenario just keeps producing worse and worse results. So
Yes.
I wonder for you, like even with your mom, as you shared this example, like how it is first of all, it's possible for everybody to really decide that you can flip that around when you're thinking about the manual. How dare she? She
Yes.
must not care about me. That's where everything is coming from, right? That's the kind of like the trickle effect
Mhm.
to like, wait a second, she is a human that simply loves these foods. And
Yes.
she also loves me. And maybe she's not on board with my weight loss plan because maybe she thinks I'm perfect the way I am. And maybe she just wants me to just enjoy some cherry pie because she loves me so damn much. Like
Yeah.
maybe that's also possible. I wonder, like, for you, how you have gone from the former, which is like, how dare she? She must not care about me, and having that negative lens versus this human clearly made this decision from a place that's not so negative. I feel like that
Yeah.
is so huge.
I agree with you. The first thing that helped me get there was getting rid of my all or nothing thinking
Hmm.
and being able to hold space for the and, right? That two things can be true at once. And I watched this happen. I just coached a client of mine recently where he didn't get the bonus he wanted and he was making it mean that he wasn't valued at work. And I
Mm,
was like, oh, no, 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 no. Both things can be true. They can
right,
absolutely value you and not pay you what you want. Like one
right.
thing doesn't necessarily mean the other. And I have a math brain, so I love like
Yeah,
the logic of all of that.
yeah,
And the same thing's true here. It's like she can absolutely love me and support my goals, and she can want a cherry pie and eat it in her house. Like all
right.
of those things are true.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so good. And I just want to share, I think that what just came to me as you were sharing that example is I think our human brains are always trying to make sense of things, right?
Correct.
So when we're like, how dare she buy the cherry pie? Our brain, because it wants to make sense of the buying of the cherry pie when I have this weight loss goal, it's like, she must not. So we've come up with a theory. It's not real. It's just a theory
Yes.
because our brain is trying to make sense of it. And I think what's so important for all of us to, and this is me too, like to remember, it's like, wait a second, my initial theory might be laced in a negative bias. And I don't know
Correct.
that I want my initial theory to be my best theory. My initial
I love
theory
the
is
way you phrase
often
that.
not my best theory. It's just my first of many attempts. And I think I spent many years letting my initial theory be the truth of the universe. Like, oh, that's just the truth. No,
Yes.
that was just a first guess.
Simply asking, like, okay, if it's not that worst case scenario motive and reasoning,
Yeah.
what else might it be? And so
Yeah.
quickly, it's wild to watch on a coaching call. I'm sure you see this with your clients, where
Oh,
you're
yeah.
like, what if it's not that? What if it might be something else? And they're like, it
Yeah.
couldn't be. And you're like, well, just guess at something. And they're
Yeah.
like, well, this person actually, is
Yeah.
going through this and feels this way and is pretty insecure. So
Mhm.
they make comments, to react. Or the same client we were talking about, a colleague of hers who doesn't respond to emails.
Mhm.
And she's like, he's lazy. I'm like, okay, if it's not that,
Let's just pretend like it's not that.
yeah,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
else might it be?
Yeah.
And it's so funny how quickly, once you like just put a pin in that first negative bias
Yeah.
theory,
Yeah.
how quickly your brain will offer you something else. And she was like, well, the emails are in English and English is not his first language and he really
Mm.
struggles with it.
Mm.
And his emails are terrible. I'm like, well, no wonder he doesn't want to write
Yeah.
them then. It must take so
It's
much effort and
yeah.
it probably triggers his insecurity. It
Mhm.
just made so much sense. And we got there in like
Yeah.
2 seconds. And then she
Yeah.
felt so much better.
Oh, this is everything. And I think there's two examples that are coming to mind. I recently was talking to a client and she was sharing kind of her history with why she's at the weight that she's at and how she has all these amazing, like we know what to do. This is so common. Like, especially with my clients, like they're brilliant and smart and they're high achieving working moms. They can follow through on things left and right and
Yeah.
do amazing things. When it comes to their weight, they struggle and they're like, I know what to do, but I'm just not doing it. So I must suck. Like literally, these are some of the words that I will hear. Like, oh, I just like I just have no discipline. I just have no willpower. It's just me. And I'm like, let's just pretend that that's not what it was. And the idea of taking that first theory off the table has blown people's minds
Yeah.
because it's like, wait, they never considered that that wasn't the right
Yes.
reason. They never even considered it. I remember my husband. This is like when I was at the 200-pound mark. I remember my husband, who's naturally just like a thin person. He eats 3 dinners and just does not gain a pound. He would come with cheese and crackers, and we have our favorite four fat fowl. If you know four fat fowl, it is like the best cheese. It's so
Okay.
good. He'd bring in the four fat fowl, these like awesome crackers with the rosemary and sea salt on top. And he's like,
Yeah.
oh, so like want a snack? I'm going to start up the Netflix because we know night routine. We're doing the Netflix plot, and he's bringing all the snacks. And I remember I'm like, he knows that I want to lose weight. Like, how dare he? There's a little bit of like, doesn't he even care? Like,
Care.
doesn't he
Yeah.
even care? It's kind of like your cherry pie example. I don't think I was as explicit with him. Like, if I had said to him, do not offer me cheese or crackers ever, I'm sure he would have followed through. So I never communicated that very clearly. But he would bring it up like, doesn't he know? Doesn't he? Can't he read my, first of all, can't he read my mind? We've been married for many, many years. By now, he should know. Number one, can't he read my mind? How dare he? And number two, he must not care.
Yeah.
And I
I was not
remember,
explicit with my mom either, by the way.
yeah,
Like,
this is, we're going to get to this. When you said boundaries, you have to be clear because I was like, but he should know me better. He should know me by now. He should know me better than anyone. He should know me better by now. And I was very righteous in that. He should be able to read my brain. I was very righteous with that. And then I remember there came a moment, this is again after coaching, that I was like, let's just pretend he did care. If you look at the evidence, like the
yes.
actual facts, the evidence goes to show that this guy does actually care and maybe even love you.
Yeah.
And so, what if we pretended like that wasn't really the thing, that he does actually care? I'm telling you, I forget like the cheese and cracker situation, but I felt so much more love for him. He's sitting here bringing me my favorite four fat fowl, and he's sitting here bringing my favorite crackers. And like, look at him being so sweet to offer me
Yeah.
the cheese and crackers. Like, what? And I was so mad at him for it for so long, rather than being in such appreciation that like he's bringing an extra plate for me.
For sure. It could be
Like,
like, oh, you're going to eat the cheese and crackers, Priyanka. And
yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
excuse
How dare
me.
he?
Right.
Because I would have been pissed. I
For
would have been more
sure.
pissed at that. If he was like, you're going to really eat that, I would have been even more pissed.
For
So
sure.
he loses in both ways. He would have also lost if he brought out the four fat fowl and crackers and didn't offer it. So, it would have been lose, lose, lose in
Yes.
every scenario. But I just think that so many times and this is, I think, another trigger. I think another way to know that you're doing this is if you're very quick to blame the other party for your
Yes.
feelings of annoyance, frustration, anger, defeat, what you name the negative flavor that you're feeling. If you're quick to blame your time, your husband, your wife, your partner, your boss, your kids, I've done all of it. If you're quick to blame them, it's because of this reason. Like you're with the first theory and you haven't allowed your brain to move on to the next.
Yeah. I also think you're outsourcing your work, right?
Yes.
Whenever you're in a state of blame, like that's the escape route detour around the actual hard, uncomfortable work of setting a boundary or having an uncomfortable conversation and having your own back and following through. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, if you could just be different, I wouldn't have to do any of this hard stuff.
Exactly. And I used to think that it's like if only all these things were different, then I wouldn't have to do the work. It's kind of what you're speaking to. I wonder, especially for high achieving working moms, it's like I'm already doing so much. I'm already doing so much. I shouldn't have to. do anymore. And I think it's
Such
one
a painful thought.
added layer of resistance to the already righteous feelings, which is why, guys, this is work. And I think I love that you said at the beginning, this is not instantaneous. It's like we peel back layer by layer by layer, and we kind of get to the nugget, which when you find it, it is a secret to the universe.
Yeah.
Seriously. Okay, can we just go back to how you and I both did not clearly communicate? You did not tell your mom. I did not tell my husband. Clearly, like, this is what's important to me. This is why it's important to me. Can you please
Yeah.
XYZ? Can we just talk about, like, why are we not clear? And how do you start changing that?
So I think you have to decide first. And I think a lot of people don't communicate because they think they sound ridiculous. And if you think
Mm,
you sound ridiculous, like question what you're wanting someone to do. So
yeah.
I would communicate about what I would want the food menu to be,
Yeah.
right? And like my mom gets to cook whatever she wants because she has free will, but I can cook at her house. That's always an option. Or I can choose to not go a certain
Mhm.
weekend. Like that's also like if you're going to serve this, I'm not going to come for dinner. That's a proper boundary. Or if you serve this, I won't eat it. Or if you keep serving stuff like this, I'll stop coming. These are all
Mhm.
things that are within my control, right? But with the cherry pie specifically, my request would have needed to be it's not a proper boundary because it's just
Right.
about making a request of their behavior, right?
Right.
And you're allowed to make requests, but people absolutely get to say no to you. And my
Right.
request would have been, hey, can you not have dessert?
Mm. And she might say yes, she might say no.
Correct. So I'm totally
Yeah.
allowed to ask, but like
Yeah.
even I have judgments of whether or not it's appropriate for me. And like I'll use appropriate in air quotes
Right.
here, but like whether it's appropriate for me to at someone else's house be like,
Mhm.
hey, could you forego dessert and like not serve dessert to your other guests?
Mhm.
And all just to make my life a little easier. And we
Right.
have a saying in my house that I had to learn this lesson the hard way when I was in high school, but my mom's saying is, don't inconvenience my life to make your life easier
Mm.
as like a standard rule.
Okay.
And I kind of live by that too, where like you do your hard work, right?
Yeah.
Don't inconvenience me to make things easier for yourself, which is
Yeah.
exactly what I was doing, right? I was wanting her
Right.
to inconvenience herself
Yeah.
because she
Yeah.
wanted something, she wanted dessert,
Yeah.
so my life would be easier.
Yeah.
And when I
Yeah.
catch myself there, it's always like, no, I don't actually want to communicate that. I really just need to manage my mind on the cherry pie or the thing that I am not thrilled about. Separate and apart from that, though, there are things that I think are totally fine to communicate where you really do want to have a boundary, and people don't communicate that because they
Mhm.
feel or think that they can't or that it's rude and they want to be agreeable or
Yeah.
accommodating, all of that. And I just think that's a lot of social
Or it's gonna,
conditioning.
like, even hurt somebody else's feelings, or what will they think of me? I think that's a huge
Yes.
one. It's like for women, the idea of setting, like, being really clear with the other party, whether it's your kid or your partner or your boss or your colleague. It's like there's some feeling around, like, what will they think of me
Yes,
for setting this boundary? And I don't think we answer the question, what will they think of you? You set the
for
boundary, and
sure.
then what?
So
Yeah.
I think that's so important because I'm always, like you said, looking at the very specific flavors of feelings that we have to be willing to feel, right? Because
Yeah.
using the general umbrella of like, oh, it's uncomfortable. I have to be willing to feel uncomfortable. It's like, no, no, no. You want to get really micro specific about the flavor of discomfort. And with boundary setting and people pleasing, a lot of times it's guilt or worry or fear, right?
Hmm.
But I think when you're worried, I mean, it is a worry that someone's going to think something of you.
Yeah.
But what I find in those instances, it's an unwillingness to feel misunderstood
Mm.
because you're perceiving that they're going to think something about you that's incorrect or wrong or untrue, right?
Right. Right.
It's
Like,
not
if you,
where
like, with the cherry pie example, if you were like, hey, can you not have this cherry pie? Like, to actually be able to say that clearly, your mom might be like, what do you like? Why would you ever ask for me to not have cherry pie? Like, what about my other guests? Like, what would she think of you for even suggesting
that I
such a
was
thing?
rude. Yeah,
That you're
that I
being
was
rude.
rude.
And you're like, oh, but, like, what if she never thought I was rude? It's kind of actually the reverse of her first opinion of you. Her first theory
Yeah,
is also not the right theory. It's just like the reverse, like in the flip.
totally. Yeah, I'm not being
Yeah.
rude.
Okay.
I'm being like,
Yeah.
I was just talking to another person about this. I've reached this point in my life. I don't have the energy to like
Yeah.
lie anymore.
Yeah.
And I find that there's just such an ease that comes from being like completely honest and candid about something where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I could just be honest and be like, hey, I'm having a really hard time sticking to this diet. And it just
Mm-hmm.
like, it's so much deprivation for me to be around sweets right now. Like,
Mm.
and it'd mean a lot to me if you didn't serve it. Like,
Right.
it's a very vulnerable, honest conversation.
Yes.
I used to be someone who's chronically late, and I have done a ton of work on time management and being someone who's punctual. And very recently, I met a friend for dinner and I was 15 minutes late, which for me is outside the
Mm-hmm.
realm of what you should be.
Mm-hmm.
And, or like the standard I have for myself now. I was very apologetic and I was also very honest. I
Mm.
thought about like coming up with something
Right.
and
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
this sounds exhausting. And the truth was, I was screwing around with an email to send to my email list.
Mm-hmm.
And I had all these links, and the hyperlinks were taking a longer time. And then I ran over on that. And then I was scrambling to get dressed, and I didn't have enough like clean outfits that I wanted to wear. So I changed, and I normally never do this. It was like the perfect storm. I
Yeah.
changed a million times,
Right.
and I knew I was taking too long.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
just was like, I don't know, hyper focusing, or I just
Yeah.
got stuck doing these things. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's a choice I'm making, but I made a choice that I wasn't proud of. And when I
Yeah.
met my friend at dinner, I was just really honest. I was like, I got caught up with this email and then like I couldn't figure out what to wear and I'm just late. And it
Yes.
just felt so
Yeah.
simple and
And
like
true.
loving and true. And
Yeah.
I think when you have a really sincere reason
Mm-hmm.
for a boundary request,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe just try communicating it.
Yeah. And I love what you said about the vulnerability because I think that it works on both sides. One is we have to be able to honestly look at and be vulnerable with ourselves. Like, where have I been off putting the responsibility to the other person for to avoid the work that I need to be
Yes.
doing? Right. There's something and I think that sometimes we're so quick, especially women, to go to like shame, blame, judgment. But if you could be vulnerable and honest without the shame, blame, and judgment, like so much opens up, kind of like what you're talking about. You could have like shamed and blamed yourself. Like, I can't believe that I was like so late to this meeting and I
Yeah.
did all the, like, I knew better. I should have known better. I saw myself being late. Like,
I
you
didn't
could
do
have
any of
had
that.
that. Exactly. And this is why it's a secret to the universe because that's the optional part. Instead of just being like, honestly and vulnerably being like, yeah, okay, like, this is what I did. Sorry, I'm late. Like, here I am,
Yeah.
right? And like really being able to step into owning that.
And I think it creates such deeper connection with
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
because we know when someone's BSing us, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we just know. And to trust another person enough with the truth
Mhm.
and to let them form an opinion about it and be
Mhm.
willing to like submit yourself to that. I think
Yeah.
it's so authentic and it creates this level of intimacy that's really rare and kind of beautiful. And my
Yeah.
friend was just like, it's like totally not a problem. I got to be on my phone for a little bit. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's how I would feel if
Right.
it were me on the receiving end of it as well, which I think
Yeah.
is really important. I'm glad that, through a
Yeah.
happenstance way we kind of got there. If you struggle to set boundaries,
Yeah.
it is almost guaranteed that you struggle to accept other people's.
100%. So true.
So that's part of your work too. If you want to get better
Yeah.
at setting boundaries, you have to get better at accepting other people's boundaries. I call these mirror judgments,
Mhm.
where if you are so critical of yourself when you make mistakes, you are critical of other people when they make mistakes.
Oh yeah.
And you assume people think the same thoughts you think
Yeah.
about them, about you, right?
Right.
Same thing with boundaries, same thing with saying no, same thing with any quote
Yeah.
unquote flaw. You have to, if you want to get in a better place with you doing something, you have to be more tolerant of other people doing it.
And that's hard work. I think that this is why coaching, it's like, we're saying a lot of things, right? And I think a lot of people that are listening, they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds true. And I can see that that's true. And to actually implement this, what we're talking about in real life, I think really it's taken coaching for both of us to be able to implement some of
Yeah.
this. It's like one thing as like a mind exercise and the other one to put it into real life practice.
The thing that I learned, I struggled with time management horrifically when I practiced law.
Hmm.
And people kept just saying to me, they're like, well, you just have to do better. You just have to do better. You just have to do better. And I was
Yeah.
like, but how? Like, I
Yeah.
don't get it. Like,
It's
do
like
you
I
got
know I have to
tips?
do better. I know I have to do better, but like clearly that knowing that is not enough.
Correct.
Yeah.
And just like my exasperation with that of
Yeah.
like, well, how do you actually do better?
Yeah.
And being able to see like all the choices you're making and to get out of your story. And I explain to people that time management is so complex. It's not just like putting stuff on your calendar. It's learning how to set boundaries, learning how to say no, learning how to take uncomfortable action when you don't feel like it, learning
Right.
how to do the math properly, learning how to not people please, learning how to care less about what other people think of you, being confident and establishing self-trust that you're going to stick to your word. Like that's also true with weight loss, right? It's this master
Mhm.
class and like letting other people judge you, letting other people be
Mhm.
disappointed, making a request and feeling awkward or exposed or judged or misunderstood or guilty or worried because you ask your
Right.
husband, like, can you please not order the fries because I'm going to want
Right.
some? Or
Right.
can we go here instead of
Right.
here because they don't have great options here?
Right.
Like, it's a master class
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
thought and emotional management, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's
For
not
sure.
simple. It's very complex. So it takes time. And like you just, I always tell people, you're struggling because you've never learned this skill set.
Right.
This is it.
That's it.
Nothing wrong
Yeah.
with you. You just haven't learned a
Yeah.
skill set yet, and you're going to learn it through coaching.
Yeah. And I think just kind of pivoting back also to the boundary piece of it, there's one other thing that you had said that I think is super important, which is kind of, I think the cherry pie example is so good. I just love it. So we're going to come back to
Yeah.
that for a second. You left the cherry pie, left the
Yeah.
house. So your boundary was like, in your mind, you first, number one, didn't communicate it, but the second one was cherry pie's there. I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
But the piece of it that I think is important is that you were pissed for a week with boundary setting. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but with boundary setting, when somebody does something and then you take an action, I'm going to leave or I'm not going to eat it or whatever your response is going to be, it's not done with anger or pissed. You're not pissed off. You're
Yeah.
totally neutral in that second half. So can you, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I don't feel like this was a clean boundary, like me storming out and leaving. I'll give
Mm,
you a
yeah.
different example with my
Yeah.
mom that is a clean boundary.
Yeah.
My mom used to make comments about my makeup all the time.
Yeah.
And I am really meticulous about my makeup.
Yeah.
Um, for those who are listening but can't see my face right now, like
Yeah.
I have a full face of makeup on. My
Yeah.
eyebrows are meticulous. I wear eyelashes, like perfect winged eyeliner. Like
Yeah.
it's, I'm very thoughtful about this process, right? I watch all the
Yeah.
TikTok videos on how to do it
Right.
perfectly. Like
Right.
I take time. And she used to make comments about my makeup.
Mm,
And not her comments, but my thoughts about her comments would send me straight to the moon every time she said it.
right.
And she was doing it like my first natural instinct is like she's doing it because she's being rude.
Hmm.
Once I get past that initial theory, she's doing it because she thought it looked bad and she cares about me. So she wanted
Right.
to help me.
Right.
And I learned how to speak up for myself. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's wholly unhelpful.
Yeah.
Because normally she makes a comment when we're out, so I don't have makeup with me, so I can't really fix it. So now I just have
Hmm.
to feel self-conscious about my appearance.
Right.
And I'm obsessive enough to like if it passed my litmus test of being able to leave the house in the morning, it's
Right.
good enough.
Right.
And I know she was doing it out of actual genuine concern and care for me. I just hated it. And I
Hmm.
finally got to a point where I communicated a boundary And it
Mm.
is a pretty draconian boundary. I said, if you ever make a negative comment about my makeup, I'll leave immediately.
Mm.
And it's pretty drastic.
Yeah.
And she never comments on my makeup anymore. And I had to
Wow.
follow through on it a couple times. Like she'd be like,
Yeah.
your eyebrows are way too dark. I was like, love you, bye. And I just will leave her house. Like, I'm not going
Oh,
to stick around. I'm not
yeah.
going to fight with you either, because I used to fight and get very upset
Right.
and we'd argue and I'd scream and like
Right.
very emotional childhood, which I don't want to
Right.
be operating from.
Right.
But I really think that you obviously can't control what
Yeah.
people say, right? But if you leave and you
Yeah.
follow through with that often enough, I believe like people don't like to waste their own time. And if people want to
Yeah.
spend time with you and you follow through on it, they'll get the
Yep.
picture. So for me, like I made that boundary not from an angry place. I made it from a really calm place. I thought about it
Okay.
and I was like,
Yeah.
she keeps doing this. What do I want to do?
Right. Right.
And really, when it's someone who's saying something, one of the only things you can do is either stop talking or leave.
Hmm. How did you come up with that boundary though? Like, how do you decide that's my
Leave.
boundaries. I'm going to, yeah.
Yeah, because not responding to her in that moment like doesn't actually solve the issue. Like another
Hmm.
example would be my ex-boyfriend loved to talk to me about politics and we're on completely opposite sides of the aisle,
Mm.
and it always led to an argument. And
Okay.
for the longest time I was like, state of outrage, state of righteousness, you know,
Okay.
so upset,
Yeah.
saying, you can't talk about this, don't bring this up, I don't want to talk about this, like you
Yeah.
shouldn't be talking about this, it always leads to an argument. And he would just keep talking about it and then we'd fight,
And
not
then
even
you
about the
fight about it
politics.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like
now we're
there's your
fighting about
experience of the
the
fight
conversation.
too. Yeah.
Yes. So it's like we're either fighting about politics or we're fighting about the fact that we're talking about politics, which either way
Yeah.
we're arguing.
Yeah.
And I finally decided he can talk about politics as much as he wants, and I'm never going to respond.
Hmm.
And if what you want is to have a conversation with me, you have to change the
Yeah.
subject.
Right. Right.
So that worked in I'm always thinking about what's the result you want to create with a
Yeah.
boundary, right? So
Yeah.
if what I don't want to do is I don't want to talk about politics, I can just
Yeah.
not talk about politics. With like the makeup comments, they're just one-off
Yeah.
comments. So
Yeah.
it's not like I'm trying to avoid the conversation. I'm trying to avoid
Yeah.
the comments altogether.
Right.
So I came up with the idea of like, it's a draconian solution. It's pretty
Right.
dramatic to leave,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it works.
Yeah. And you know what? I just want to also add, I think it's also important when you are deciding whether or not you want to set a boundary with someone, the goal is not to manipulate the other person to do what you want them to do. That's not the point. The point of a
Correct.
boundary is to create a sense of safety for you, a sense of calm and peace for you, right? So the
Yeah.
goal, I think that that's important because sometimes I can imagine people just start setting boundaries left and right. But the goal is not to change the other person or to manipulate them to be different. It's just to tell
Yeah.
them what's important to you. And if they want to engage with you and if that's important to them, then here's how. Here's how to do that. And I
Correct.
just kind of want to, because like I know this is going to get, we need to like keep having more conversations on the podcast with
Absolutely.
together. But I'm just curious, kind of to like as we wrap things up, like that moment where you say, okay, I'm going to be walking out to your mom or to your ex-boyfriend. I'm not going to respond. What is the emotional state that you are going to be in when you take that action? Have you thought
Yeah,
about that before? Like what you want
for
to
sure.
choose on
I want to be
purpose?
grounded. I want
Hmm.
to feel in control. Um, I'd love to say I want to be calm, but I don't know that I actually get to calm. I think grounded is calm has this like lack of care to me a little bit, where like grounded is an intentional calm, but I do care about the situation. That's why I'm leaving. So
Right.
grounded feels really accurate to me.
Yeah.
And then in control of myself, of my emotions, and of the
Hmm.
situation. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
control her, but I am controlling what is within my control, which is me and my behavior.
Yeah. And I just kind of to like add to that for me, because boundary setting is kind of new for me. to be honest. Like it's something that I'm still working on. I'm still thinking about like where and how I want to set boundaries. But the one thought that has really helped me decide that this is an appropriate boundary is I love myself too much. It's about me, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not setting the boundary because of them. It's like, oh, but I love myself too much to not set this boundary. And I think that that has allowed me to almost feel love. So even if I'm having to leave or to walk out of a room or to not talk, it's like, oh, because I love myself and I can feel love because I'm loving myself, right? In that moment. And I think it feels so different than being pissed afterwards or annoyed or righteous. So we get to
Mhm.
leave with that. What do you think?
I totally agree with you. Setting boundaries is loving. It's
Yeah.
loving to yourself. It's
Yeah.
also loving to the other person,
Yeah.
which I think is a little bit of a stretch for people to wrap their brains around.
Right.
But otherwise, you're just resenting them.
And you're not being your authentic self.
Correct. So if what you
Yeah.
really want is a meaningful relationship with people,
Yeah.
and I know it's the time of the year when we're recording this of
Yeah.
like New Year, everyone picks their word of the year or their
Yeah.
goals or whatever. And one of my huge goals last year, it wasn't my word of the year. My word was free. My word of the year this year is also free. It's just like going to be
Mhm.
a cornerstone thing for me,
Yeah.
probably for the rest of my life. But I normally have like a sub word now that I keep picking
Mhm.
the same word every year.
Yeah.
And one of my main goals in 2022 was to let myself be known
Mhm.
and seen by the people
Mhm.
in my life.
Yes.
And rather than like putting on an act, putting on a show, wearing a
Yeah.
hat,
Yeah.
being some version of me, like just
Yeah.
to really show people the authentic me. And
Yes.
like my mom thinks it's ridiculous when I leave her house when she makes a
Right.
comment about my eyebrows. Like,
Right.
you're allowed to
Yeah.
think that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
by all means, right?
Yeah. Even what you were just saying about like it's loving to you, but also loving to them, like it can be a stretch, but also like with practice, with like kind of implementing this day after day, week after week into like who you are, I think it just creates more authentic relationships and
Does.
more honesty, which is loving for the relationship, right?
Correct.
Which is
Yeah,
so good. Okay. I mean, we could keep on going on
I
and
know.
on this topic,
We'll
and
do a
we
part
probably need
two.
to, I always say that it's like whenever I have a podcast conversation with one of my friends, I'm like, we're going to need to part 2, 3, 4, because this is a big topic. I think it probably does deserve more time and like, we should talk again. But for everybody listening, tell us more about how they can find you. You have a podcast, you have a group. Like, tell us how we can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on two main platforms. I'm on LinkedIn at my name, Olivia Vizachero, and I'm on Instagram. My handle is the Less Stress Lawyer. That's also my website, thelessstresslawyer.com. I work with people one on one, and I also run an incredible mastermind called the Less Stress Lawyer Mastermind. You can find that on my website and learn all the amazing details there. And then I have a podcast called the Less Stress Lawyer Podcast. I also do a free monthly webinar every month on a different topic. So, like one month, I'll cover boundaries, like we talked about today. I'll do a
Mhm.
master class on that or time management or all that stuff. If you go to my Instagram, you can sign up to learn and stay up to speed every time I do a new one. So, you get all those goodies for free.
So good. Olivia, thank you so much for coming on, having this conversation. We're going to do it again, guys. I
My
hope you
pleasure.
guys
It was
all loved
so
it.
good talking to you.
So good. Bye.
Bye.